Hi, thanks for joining me. I'm Sean Collins, 3M Application Engineer. For this video, I'm going to talk about my top 7 tips for a successful plastic repair. Hey, before we get started, I just want to remind you to always wear the proper PPE when performing your repairs. Also, this video is intended for a professional workspace such as a collision repair shop. I put a link to all our safety and warranty information in the description below. Let's get started. Okay, tip number 1 is proper cleaning. It's especially important to clean these plastic parts on a vehicle because they've been treated differently than sheet metal parts. So one of the things we have to be very careful about is cleaning the backside of a bumper if we're going to be doing a repair on the backside as well. So the reason for that is the manufacturers spray a slippery substance in the mold so the bumper will release from it when they want it out. So what we need to do is clean both sides with soapy water first, then go back and clean with a solvent. But again, on the backside, do a real thorough job of cleaning that mold release agent off. Now you need to use both soap and water and a product like this, a solvent cleaner, and use one that's compliant for your area. But we need to use that because these don't always take off water-soluble contaminants, and then vice versa for the soap and water. They don't always take off the solvent-soluble contaminants. So you need to always do both. I always recommend cleaning the entire bumper, not just one spot where you're working. 2 reasons. Number 1, you don't want to drag contaminants in from areas that weren't cleaned during the work that you're doing on that bumper, either with your hands or with your abrasives or whatever it is. So clean the entire bumper. Also, you may identify and see other damage that you didn't know was there on that bumper if you clean the entire thing. You might find some spider cracking over on an end, which really isn't repairable in most cases, and then you're wasting your time making that repair. So clean the bumper thoroughly with soap and water, solvent cleaner, entire bumper, and you should have a really nice clean surface to work with. Okay, tip number 2 is proper mixing and equalizing of the cartridge. I cannot stress enough the importance of doing that. If we don't do this properly, we may get areas in that adhesive that don't cure. So it's very important that first, once we remove the red plug, before we put a nozzle on, we want to extrude some of that material out into a paper towel. All right? So make sure as you're extruding that out, you're looking at both sides of the cartridge and making sure that the material is coming out of both sides and there's no kind of obstructions, especially if it's already a used cartridge where you're taking off an existing nozzle. Sometimes it can dry up in there and cure a little bit, and just a little chunk can go in and plug that nozzle from one side of the material extruding out of here. So very important that you equalize into a paper towel as you look at the cartridge to see the adhesive coming out cleanly. Then once we put our nozzle on, we want to extrude about 2 inches or so of material out through the nozzle before we begin to put that on the vehicle. And the reason for that is when the first material starts to go into this nozzle, there's no back pressure on it because the nozzle is empty. Once that nozzle fills up with material, now it puts a little back pressure on that makes it go through the mixer a little more efficiently. So that first little bit of material may not be thoroughly mixed. So always gun about 2 inches out before you get started. As long as you're doing that, you should have a successful repair with a good, even mix. Okay, tip number 3 for a successful plastic repair. We're going to talk about tapering out the repair area. So if we have some damage or a crack in this bumper, and I know it's difficult to see, but there's a taper right in here. So what I need to do is I need to groove out this repair area right in here so that our adhesive will go into that taper. So you can't really see it, but the taper is right here, okay? So you can see it's about 1 inch wider than the damage on each side. So this tapered out area should be very gradual. There should be no sharp edges. So when I taper, looking at it as a profile, I don't want a V like this. I want a really wide U like this, okay? So this has sharp edges on it in this area here, and those edges will eventually show through after heating and cooling cycles on that plastic and on that adhesive. So again, nice wide taper and very gradual with no hard edges, and you should have a very strong and durable repair. Okay, tip number 4 is about sanding the repair area and the repair material. So first of all, we want to make sure when we're doing our tapering and our grinding and then subsequent sanding that we remove all those deep scratches with the next grade of sandpaper. So if I started with a grinder, I would want to go to 80 grit on the DA next, but removing all those grinder scratches. And then when I went 80, then I would want to go around the surrounding repair area with 180, where my repair material is going to be feathered out. If it goes in too deep a scratch, that may show up in the repair area later on as well. So make sure as you go, you're refining the previous grade of scratches thoroughly, or you may see some pigtails and some scratches through the finish after a certain period of time. The next thing we have to talk about is how we sand. So remember, this is a plastic material that is heat sensitive and smears and melts pretty easy. So any sanding we do, we should do at a little bit lower speed than what we're normally used to. So turn that sander down a little bit to a lower speed so it doesn't get too aggressive and smear the plastic. The other thing we have to be careful about is when we have our repair material on here and we're sanding that down, that we don't sit in one spot for too long and bear down hard, because if you do that, you'll get it heated up and it could roll that edge back. So keep your sander moving at all times, and again, light pressure at slower speeds than what we're accustomed to. So if you're doing these things and sanding everything properly, should lead to a very successful repair. Okay, the next tip for a successful plastic repair is something that I see all the time, and it's typically going to cause some problems, and you don't notice those problems until you go and bake the bumper and then something bubbles up, and by that time it's too late and you've wasted all that valuable time. So when you're sanding something down before you put on repair adhesive, you want to make sure there is no shiny plastic. So what can happen is if you use a pistol grip grinder, a roll-lock, or a file belt sander and you get a little edge, you could cause some gouges like you see here. And I don't know how well you can see, but right here there's one, and right here, I'll circle it, and right here, there's some shiny areas that are not thoroughly abraded. So if it's shiny, that means it's really smooth plastic, and these repair materials will not stick to smooth, shiny plastic. So make sure before you put that repair adhesive on, you blow it off good, inspect it really well, and make sure there's no shiny areas left, or it could bubble up on you later. So if you're taking care of that properly, you should have a good, successful repair. Tip number 6 for a successful plastic repair. So we have to choose the materials we use carefully. We want to make sure we're using the proper materials that are made for plastic repair. And some guys still cross over and use materials that were really designed for metal repairs and use them on plastic repairs, and it's kind of a recipe for disaster. You don't want to do that. Use the proper stuff. So one thing I see is typically if I use the correct repair material to begin with and sanded it down and ended up with some pinholes or some small flaws, a lot of times the technician will go and pick up this glaze, which is polyester, and put polyester over this epoxy material. Anytime you're mixing chemistries like that, you're asking for trouble. So you don't want to use this type of material on a plastic bumper. And I'll talk more about that in a second because it's also not flexible. So we really don't want to use this. So if you do have a flaw, pinhole, scratches, whatever that need to be filled, use the same exact plastic repair material that you did the original repair with, okay? So you're not mixing those chemistries. This is the 3M 5887 cosmetic repair material, and if I use that, have a flaw, I'm going to mix more of that same material up and fill those pinholes in with that, and I won't have any crossing of those chemistries. The other reason you don't want to use a polyester is that it is not flexible like the plastic bumper. So I put some polyester material like this glaze on a plastic plate here, and when I bend this, you can see it cracks very easily. And some of these glazes, if you put those on, they may seem flexible at first, but if you go back and check them a few weeks later, they get very brittle. So this one I put some guide coat on, and when I bent it, you can see all the little cracks in that guide coat. So what appears to be flexible at first may not remain flexible all the time. So this is the proper plastic repair material here, and you can see I can bend this 180 degrees and it's not going to crack. It's very, very, very flexible. Okay? So don't mix and match those chemistries with your materials. Use the same thing. That goes also for, by the way, the adhesion promoter. Don't use a brand X adhesion promoter with a brand Y product. Stick with that same system and you won't have any problems. So don't mismatch your materials. Use flexible materials. Don't mismatch those chemistries and you should have a successful repair. Tip number 7 for a successful plastic repair. Read the instructions, okay? Very important. I know a lot of times these instructions go into the trash without reading. It's a good idea to go through these every once in a while. There may be something in there that you forget. Even if you do this on a daily basis, you get into habits, you may forget something. So that's what those instructions are for. They're included with the product. Open them up occasionally, page through them, and make sure you're following all those steps exactly. I'm sure you're probably going to find some information in there that you haven't seen or you forgot, not to mention the fact that we change these instructions every once in a while. If we see that people are struggling with a certain step or missing something, we may write those into the instructions to emphasize that so you don't forget. So please read the instructions. That'll lead to a real successful plastic repair. Thanks again for joining me for this video. If you liked it, please consider subscribing to our channel. For more content like this, see us at 3M Collision Repair Academy, and I left a link below for that channel. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time.